guys, this is Intricate from AmigaLove.com. I wanted to walk you through a project I've been working on for the past day and a half. It's pretty interesting in my opinion. If you're really into the Commodore Amiga scene and you want to take it all the way back to the 80s, there was an amazing crowd-funded project based out of Australia in 1989. I've actually found some of the original documentation that was being passed around in Usenet form and bulletin boards, where basically this group of people, this group of guys in Australia, were kind of upset with Commodore back in 1989 when they heard the rumors about Commodore dropping the Amiga 1000 basically from its interest, from its focus, and essentially discontinuing it. They had some really intelligent engineers that put their heads together. One in particular, name of Andrew Wilson, basically came up with a concept to completely redesign the Amiga 1000's motherboard to try and make it contemporary for the times. This is 3 to 4 years later now, right? Because it originally was put together and then retailed in 1986. So here it is 3 years later, and the community, the Amiga community, was stunned. Some of them were anyway, and some of them were kind of pissed that Commodore was deciding to focus all of its attention on the 500 and the 2000 and leave the 1000 behind, which many of these guys believed to be just as capable, if not more so, if just given a chance. It had all the same chips. So what Andrew Wilson and some of his colleagues did was start to build a crowdfunding campaign. And to my knowledge, it's the first crowd-funded hardware project in the Amiga scene's history. Kind of amazing when you consider that this was being done through sort of word of mouth, user groups, Usenet, BBSs, that kind of thing. And basically what they did was they asked for people to put in a $100 deposit, and then the entire cost was going to be somewhere in the ballpark of about $600, which back in 1991, that's essentially the price of an Amiga 500. So it took a leap of faith for many people, but for Amiga fans that had an Amiga 1000 and didn't want to toss it, they wanted to, because they knew it was all the same chips, they wanted just a way to continue to use it and expand it. And so what he did was he created this design, which ultimately did get funded, where he packed in just a ton of really cool new features, some reorganization of some of the basic chip diagram layout, and then he beefed it up a little bit with some RAM and some other little odds and ends, which that's why I'm making this video, because I feel like a lot of folks out there have probably never seen one of these before. I never had before I got it in my hands, and it really is a remarkable piece of engineering. And I think it should be remembered and embraced to some degree. There's only, to my knowledge, less than 200 of these things floating around out there. So why don't we take a look, and I'll walk you through with what I know so far. Okay guys, what I'd like to do first is just kind of walk you through some of the basics of the motherboard's layout and some of the unique features that it provides. Because it is completely different from anything you've ever seen if you've only ever looked at Amiga motherboards. This is completely unique. To start off, down here, this is where you usually put the 256 kilobyte RAM expansion, which basically anyone that bought one of these back in the day, you pretty much had to have to do much of anything, which popped right in there. Now, what this actually has, let me pull this off. This actually has a sticker on here that says, "Do not connect 256K expansion to this slot." Well, it's kind of weird, isn't it, that they kept the slot? But if you look at the original manual, which thank God I have, because it's so handy, that was actually saved off for what they called the front expansion. Now, I don't know if they ever actually made anything for it. Maybe Mr. Wilson did. I'm not really completely up to speed with all of the different peripherals and expansions that he did create for this thing. I know he made about at least 20 other different types of Amiga pieces of hardware, memory boards, and all of that kind of thing. But in any case, you weren't supposed to put your expansion RAM on here. This was saved for something special. Now check this out. This is probably one of the coolest features right off the bat. This is a Scuzzy Controller built right into the motherboard. So you can actually put a hard drive in here, and this was a feature the Amiga 1000 simply never had. You had to use an external, and there were ways that you could update your startup sequence when you were launching Kickstart for the first time, when you're booting your machine, that could say, hey, go find my external hard drive, it exists, and go ahead and launch Workbench for me. You could do stuff like that, but it was kind of a hack. This is built right in, and it's totally awesome. I actually don't have a spare hard drive at the moment. I have a couple that I think I can format and get going, but I think what I may actually wind up doing, simply because of space and heat and all of that, and power, I think I'm probably just going to hook this up to a Scuzzy to SD card. And since this isn't being utilized anymore, this is where the front expansion would go, right? You've got this little cover that goes right there. I think I might be able to actually fit the Scuzzy to SD card right in here and make this sort of my little hard drive area, and probably sneak an LED light in there, because you know there's one down here somewhere. I just have to figure out where it is, because they planned for it. Oh, I should point this out too. When you got one of these in the mail, you got this groovy little Phoenix sticker to apply to the front cover to kind of let everybody know you're a badass. And obviously, when you have this Commodore logo down here, that's the signal to anyone that knows Amiga 1000s that, hey, this is a PAL machine. This is something most likely from Europe or Australia or other places that are in PAL mode. This is the only Amiga I own that is like this. I live in the United States, and we're in NTC land over here, but so this is my first PAL machine as well. Now let's continue on. We actually have right here, it's hard for you to see, but there's actually a place for an external Scuzzy as well. Down here, all of these guys with the little yellow rectangles next to them, those are all of these are all RAM that's built right onto the motherboard. And I believe this machine, as it is right now, has what they call 1 megabyte of slow RAM, which is basically fast RAM. It's just wired differently. And it has 1 megabyte of chip. So technically it has 2 megs of RAM. But really it's more about that 1 meg, right? Which is what most software, most games are only looking for 1 anyway. So that's, in terms of what I do, I will probably still put an expansion on it or a board in here that has RAM to beef it up to maybe somewhere between 3 and 8 maximum. That's really all I ever need. Even though I have some Amiga machines that have over 100 megs, I never even scratch the surface of that stuff. It's cool, but not really using it. And to have a badass retro battle station like this, somewhere between 3 to 8 is plenty. So that's what I'll be doing. I actually swapped out the PSU, the one that I originally had in an empty case. I should point that out. I did not rip out a working Amiga 1000 motherboard and throw it somewhere. I had one that was broken. I had one that did not work at all. It had serious issues that are beyond me to fix. And so I had it in an anti-static bag and was just saving it so that if I ever need to salvage chips or whatever, I've got that. So this was going into an empty case, just so I make that clear. But the original PSU that I had, the fan was making a real nasty clunking noise. You could tell it was on the way out. And so I got a refurbished, I actually had this one prior to this project. sitting on the shelf kind of waiting to be used, and finally it got its wings and is a happy camper now inside of this guy, because it's totally smooth and nice and quiet. Back here are the the chips that you would recognize, the Garys and the Nieces and all of these guys. Over here's Agnes. So these are ones that you would recognize. But check this out. Coin battery. It actually has a real-time clock. Amiga 1000 did not have a real-time clock. They had all of these really goofy third-party aftermarket real-time clock modules that you could buy. Some that would go into the mouse port, some that would go into in between the keyboard and the machine. There's one that goes into parallel ports. I mean, it basically find a port, stick a clock in it. This one's built right in and it works, which is totally kick-ass. The only annoying part is this whole soldering business, soldering a battery onto one of these old motherboard strips. I've taken these off before and they're kind of a pain in the butt, but it is doable. It's not that big a deal. And I believe this one still works. So I'm good to go there. Let's see, moving on. This is a really cool feature that I'll probably never use, but it's what they called the Amiga 2000 expansion slot. It's basically a Zorro. You could pop a Zorro card in there. Of course, the case only goes up this high. So it's somewhere around, if I remember correctly, it's something like you've got like 47 millimeters of tight clearance if you were to put a card in here, and most cards are over 50. So a lot of the stuff that you see in here that I'm pointing at and describing is really meant to be put into a totally different tower or PC box. I'm sorry, but that's sacrilege for me. If you're going to get an Amiga 1000, for goodness sake, the whole point of it is it looks awesome. You've got the garage with the keyboard going underneath. There's no way I'm taking this thing out of the Amiga 1000's case. That's, for me, the aesthetics are half the battle, and that's already been completely beaten. Over here, we have a video slot, so you could actually have put in an additional graphics card. Again, height issues. And then let me show you some other things. Okay guys, the next thing I wanted to do is show you some of the really interesting aesthetic things that Andrew Wilson and his team, actually probably Andrew Wilson himself, decided to put onto the motherboard to essentially and literally leave his signature on the Amiga world forever with this product. For example, if I come down here, right by that front expansion that we talked about at the beginning, there's actually this quote here, which I don't know if you can see that or not, but right down here it says, "Found on a church pew in Old St. Paul's Church, Baltimore, dated 1692. And I will transcribe what this says and put it in the attached article, which will be over on amigalove.com for you to check it out later. But what an interesting and strange thing to do on a motherboard is to quote something like that. If you come over onto this side, over back behind the RAM, move my light, see if that helps. There you go. You can see Andrew Wilson's signature right there in the green, which is really cool. I kind of dig his little attempt at a logo there with the AW. Not bad. Not bad, AW. Down here, right in front of where the floppy drive would be, are the various people and teams, really, that assembled and inspected this in 3 different stages as it was put together, which is pretty dang cool. And then right above where or actually right below the back of the floppy, there's a poem. And I'll transcribe that as well and put that in the attached article. Just really some kind of cool, heady stuff, kind of artsy stuff to be putting into this kind of work. And there's obviously the name right back there where the daughter board would go. Some really cool little signature aesthetics added to a
very complicated, techie piece of hardware. But I think that's really classy, and it reminds me a lot of sort of the same mentality that the guys at Apple did with the Mac, and obviously the original Amiga creators did with the Amiga 1000. And so you can see this is definitely an echo and an homage to the Amiga 1000's creators, and obviously just a huge project and labor of love here from Andrew Wilson.
So I know this looks kind of ghetto, but you guys know what it's like when you're messing with stuff like this. You kind of just got to put it wherever you can without destroying something. So down here, this is another really, really cool feature. One of the big selling points, in my opinion. You've got these Rom bays, right? So Kickstart ROMs. So I can boot right up into 1.3 right off this sucker. Or if I wanted, I haven't checked. This is either 1.2 or 2.0. I need to see which one this is. But I could alternate in between one or the other. I believe off a keyboard stroke. And then this one here, this bizarre one, this is actually a Kickstart ROM as well. But it was for where if you were really industrious and you had an EEPROM burner, it makes me think this was for Mr. Wilson himself, where you could create custom Kickstart ROMs, burn them, and put them into these 4 bays. And then over here was a Kickstart ROM bay number 4. So, I mean, it's kind of amazing the variation that you were provided. This one here is ready to go for 2. And it's got a math coprocessor right back here, which I'm probably never even going to tap into. But it does exist, and it is right there, and that's pretty cool. This right here is for a daughter board, which I do not own. I've never actually seen one in person, but they are out there. And there, of course, is my original. That's the original CPU. All of these chips are original to an Amiga 1000 at some stage. Not mine. It came pre-populated, which is really cool too. I got lucky in that department. The only exception to that being obviously the RAM over here. This was never a part of the original design. All right, I'm going to move the camera, so I'm going to have to apologize for a little bit of shaky cam action, but here we go. Back here, we've got another, so this is the floppy controller, obviously. There's another additional interior serial connection, totally funny looking, right? Can you see that? It looks like it belongs out on the back of the machine, but they put that on the inside, which is just kind of hilarious. And then over here is a connector for an external serial. Even though you've already got these other ports. I mean, they were just like, how many things could you possibly attach to this machine? A lot. A lot. They were really kind of going for it to say, well, and they even say this in some of the documentation that was being passed around in the Usenets. They really wanted this motherboard for Amiga 1000 owners to extend the life. This was 1991. They wanted to, at least mine is, they wanted this to last another 10, they wanted to take this to the year 2000, basically. That's what they were thinking when they did all of this stuff. Trying to future-proof it into another decade after it was actually born, which is kind of amazing, kind of cool. Can you imagine Apple trying to do something like that these days? I don't think so. At least not from a phone or iPad perspective. Maybe from a computer standpoint, you could make that argument, but from small devices and whatnot, holy smoke, those days are over. And hey, I love Apple, okay? So I'm just saying, stuff isn't really built to last that long anymore. Yeah, so the next piece of this is I'm going to walk you through some of the challenges that I've run across so far, and some of the gotchas that I had no clue. Because it's not like I can just get online and start finding answers to this thing, because there just aren't that many around, and I honestly don't know anybody personally that has one. I have a couple of online connections who I think might have one, but I really don't know. And regardless, some of these feel so customized, I don't even know if they're necessarily the same. So One of the gotchas I had, when I first got this, it came all the way from Australia, right? And I plug it in. I have flashing green screen. I've got a blinking LED power light. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I turn everything off and I start pushing down all the chips, and it's just creaking like an old rocking chair everywhere you go. You're like, oh my God, has every single chip popped out of this thing? So I'm just like mashing down everything. Flip the power back on. Then at that stage, and I had the floppy drive screwed in. Then at that stage, all of the flashing went away, but now the motherboard didn't even boot at all. It was a black screen. I was like, what the hell? And so then I spent hours and hours and hours trying to track down, because I had moved the entire thing off my floor, which is where I was originally working because I had more room, up to my relatively small workbench area. And somehow during the moving of the case, I flipped a switch, which is, let me show you, right back here. There's this weird little switch. And I had no idea what that's even for, but it had gone plick that way. And if you follow the lines, it goes in here right next to these serial ports, right? The floppy drive and the internal and external serial ports. And I thought, well, just after about 4 hours of pulling my hair out, and I've only got so much to pull, come on. I just flipped this over and out of desperation tried the power one more time, and holy smoke, it worked. I couldn't believe it. I was so happy and excited that I figured it out. And basically what this is this little switch here would allow you to boot from external, you could turn this off as the boot drive and make your external a boot drive. Why is that cool? Well, it's sort of like the old CD TV. It allowed you to have a CD-ROM as an internal drive if you wanted one, and then boot off your external floppy or whatever. It just gave you more options on how you could start the machine up. Pretty cool, but it was super annoying and scary. I thought I'd completely fried or shorted out my motherboard, or then the floppy drive wasn't working either, and it was related to the same problem. More hours down the drain there. So finally, so this is an Amiga 1000 floppy, right? They're built like tanks. They're gigantic. I mean, they're really big. Let me show you. This is an Amiga 2000 floppy drive, right? I mean, there's about 1.5 centimeter, maybe 2 centimeter difference in height here, right? And so it's really more like that. It's kind of where it's supposed to be. There's just all this extra gadgetry because they hadn't really figured out how to minimize those things yet. Well, as a result, the original Amiga 1000 floppy drive, it mashes onto my Kickstart Rom down here. And as a result, that makes everything go dark and not work. Sometimes you get little green screens again and all of that. So a future project, and relatively near future project, is going to be either taking this guy and putting him inside of this bracket, or doing what the previous owner did, which I didn't know he did until after I finally gave up and contacted him and said, hey, help me, I'm really confused. How did you get this damn floppy drive to fit? And he said, oh, probably should have told you. I actually put an Amiga 500 floppy drive in mine, and then I soldered onto the LED, so that would work. And you can get them, online for about 25 euros. I was like, oh God. Well, so at least now I know the answer to the problem. I just have to decide, am I going to use this guy, which came from a parts machine of mine that is also another parts machine of mine for Amiga 2000s, or just buy a brand new refurbished one out of Europe and get that in about a week, which is kind of where I'm leaning, so I can save this for another rainy day. So there's that. And then I think the next project after that is going to be the Scuzzy to SD, which I have learned over time how how to do with Kickstart and Workbench 1.3, which is where this really needs to live. I'm not trying to soup this up into some super modern thing. I just want it to be as kick-ass as it was when this came out, or at least when the original idea was floating around in November of 1989. And back then they were all on 1.3, and they were like, ooh, there's rumors of 1.4. So yeah, I'll probably put Kickstart 1.3 on here. And then at that stage, from a software compatibility standpoint, this is pretty much going to hit 99.9% of everything I'll ever want to touch. And it will be rocking with some RAM, and I might even stick a very mild accelerator in there, maybe 14 megahertz, something like that. There's only a handful of games where it really matters. The vast majority of what I play, adventure games, RPGs, all of that kind of stuff, it really makes no difference at all. But for some, it does. It is actually a better experience if you've got a little extra juice. So I'll probably put something in there because I do like playing some other things too. Now, what I want to do is I want to actually show you guys what it's like when I boot it up, so you can kind of see that experience. So hang tight for a second. Okay, so here we are at the Workbench request screen, which I just turned the machine on. It took about somewhere between 2 and 3 seconds to get to this. Normally, if you're an Amiga 1000, as you know, you'd be looking at the Kickstart request screen, and that's not where we're at. We're at the Workbench, which is essentially, this is basically now an Amiga 500. That's what it feels like. That would have come right out of the store, or one of the other all-in-ones that were not equipped with hard drives from the store, which is freaking awesome. Okay, it's just, I love the nostalgia of using floppy disks with my Amiga 1000. I have a fully restored stock Amiga 1000 that I cherish and adore and use on an almost daily basis each night on bulletin board systems. That's a completely other topic. But there's something really cool about doing this here in this environment with this form factor, and I love it. So this is pretty sweet. I'm digging it. Now, let me get my Workbench disk really quickly. It's funny, I had to make a bunch of, I had to make a new Workbench disk last night because as I was preparing to do this video, I realized all of my experiments actually crushed my my other Workbench disk that I had. I totally trashed it. I must have put it inside and ejected it from 2 different floppy drives over 50 some times trying to figure out what the hell was going on. But anyway. All right, so this is an original Amiga 1000 drive, and it's really noisy, which it's more authentic, so that's okay. But it's really kind of hilarious. So here we go. I still have to mess with some of the video settings somewhere. You can see that I've got a little bit of space here now, the way this PAL machine is talking to my NTSC monitor, but I think that's going to be a pretty easy fix. I just have to actually look into it here in the near future. Lots of projects, lots of good times. And you can see up here these unset. That's it trying to find the clock. I think this is actually a Workbench disk that was it's probably written more towards the 500 or 2000, so it doesn't fully understand. It's not using the right commands for this clock, so that's an easy fix too. I'll go in there and do that later. But what I wanted to do was, now that we're here, show you I've got basically the 2 megs of RAM that we talked about before. You know, they take the chip and the fast/slow and they combine it to give you this maximum. That's why this is kind of goofy looking. You're like, wait, I thought it was only 1 meg of RAM. No, well, but they put the chip in there too. What I want to do now is I actually want to show you sysinfo. No, not that program. It's not trustworthy. Well, it's all we got. And you know what else? It was made in Australia. So it feels right, doesn't it? We got this motherboard from Australia. We got the software from Australia. There's some pretty cool stuff coming out of Australia in the late 80s, early 90s for the Amiga, let's be honest. Okay, now it says empty because I was in a rush. I haven't renamed this yet, but whatever. This is my sysinfo. Oh yeah, okay. And then the reason why I want to show you this, it's not like it's, oh my gosh, it's a vampire. Look at all that horsepower. That's not what this is about. This is all about just how weird and different it is, because I've never seen anything like this before. And if you haven't had a Phoenix, I'm willing to bet you haven't either, because it's so unique. And so this is more just one of those kind of drive-by curiosity things, because it's weird and it's cool. So you can see here it says the clock's found. That's pretty sweet. And it's got the ECS Agnes at 1 meg. Right? Again, this Amiga 1000, guys. This is crazy. We're in PAL mode, obviously, having come from beautiful country of Australia. And coming over here, this is kind of a waste, but just for fun, let's do the speed, right? We know it's 7 megahertz, but this is kind of funny because of the way this thing's wired. It's decided to say getting better, which I think is like a tiny step up from, you know, way to go, you're normal, but whatever, getting better. Expand that. Yeah, it's the same thing as really anybody else. And then you've got all this other stuff up here, which I've never seen this before, right? All of this extra stuff that the RAM is being assigned to, right? Pretty cool. And then if you go over to the memory section, it's just going to tell you what we kind of already know. I mean, have you guys ever seen slow RAM before? That's first for me. I don't think that's a very good marketing name. Do you? Probably not. We'll go into the memory section. There it is again, in my face. Must you say it twice? Yeah, so we've got this 1 meg basically here. And then you go to the next one and you've got a 1 meg of chip RAM right there. All right, so there's our 2 megs of RAM. And that's pretty much it in here, I think, in terms of unique things to see and kind of geek out over. So guys, that's the Phoenix motherboard. Hope you enjoyed walking through this project that I've been working on for a little while as much as I enjoyed walking you through it. If you like this kind of stuff, I only talk about Commodore and Amiga related topics, and it's either me playing games or hardware projects like this. Please feel free to subscribe to this channel and like the video if you actually liked it, or leave some comments down below and tell me what I got wrong or what I got right. I'd love to talk to you about it, and I'm also going to be linking to an article over at amigalove.com that talks through some of these exact same issues that I've had and some of the things that I've learned, including the really cool Usenet article that I found. I completely transcribed that so that it formats better into modern day devices, so you can read through that. It's really cool, really interesting to kind of see how they were trying to drum up money back in 1989 for this project. So we'll see you next time. Take it easy. Bye-bye.